Eliza Marlowe gave away the last thing she owned that could be eaten to a stranger pinned beneath a freight wagon. It was one square of gingerbread, wrapped in waxed paper and crushed at the corners from 3 days of travel. She had not eaten since sunrise. The man had blood on his collar, a wagon axle across his thigh, and no idea who she was. By sunset he would tell her a false name. By noon the next day she would discover he was the man she had crossed 1,700 miles to meet. But before any of that, Eliza saw a human being in trouble, so she put down her valise, stepped off the road, and went to work. The letter in her pocket had promised a simpler beginning. It came from a rancher in Wyoming territory named Elias Rourke, written in a hand so square and disciplined that every line looked measured with a ruler. He described himself as 34, unmarried by circumstance rather than conviction, owner of a cattle spread called Broken Horn, and in need of a wife who preferred plain truth to polished manners. Eliza had smiled at that phrase the first time she read it. Plain truth. She had spent 7 years teaching children in a brick schoolhouse outside Philadelphia, and another 2 months watching a board of trustees explain, in polished manners, why her classroom had to close while their salaries did not. The school lost its endowment in March. By April she had written 18 applications. By May she had received 4 answers. 2 posts had already been filled. 1 offered half her former wage and a bed in the headmaster's attic. The last informed her that a woman nearing 27 should consider marriage a more practical use of her energies. She burned that letter. She kept Elias Rourke's. They had exchanged 6 letters over 4 months. He never wrote poetry. He never praised her appearance. He asked whether she could manage accounts, whether she feared distance, whether she believed affection could grow from respect. Eliza answered the way she taught, directly. She told him she could balance a ledger, set a broken finger, organize 30 restless children, and live without a piano. She told him distance did not frighten her nearly as much as uselessness. She told him respect was not a guarantee of affection, but it was better soil than flattery. His reply came 3 weeks later. Then come west, Miss Marlowe. If we meet and find we have written honestly, we will decide what comes next as 2 adults. No promises beyond that. No tricks. She read those last 2 words more than once. No tricks. Now the stagecoach that had carried her to Red Willow was gone, its dust fading beyond the depot, and Elias Rourke was nowhere in sight. The depot consisted of 1 plank platform, a telegraph room, a feed shed, and a sun-bleached sign that leaned a little farther east than the building. Eliza waited 1 hour, then 2. At the 3rd, she entered the telegraph room and asked the operator whether a message had arrived. The operator was a narrow man with tobacco-colored whiskers and the cautious expression of someone who preferred not to carry news that belonged to wealthy men. Name? Eliza Marlowe. I was to be met by Mr. Elias Rourke of Broken Horn Ranch. The key on his desk stopped clicking. Rourke? Yes. He glanced toward the window as if the rancher might materialize from the heat. Broken Horn is 11 miles north. I was told 6 to the south gate, 11 to the house. Eliza folded her hands so he would not see how tightly she had laced her fingers. Has there been an accident? Not that I've heard. Then perhaps there has been a delay. Likely, he said it too quickly. She thanked him, returned to the platform, and looked at her trunk. It contained 2 dresses, 4 books, her mother's sewing roll, a slate, a box of copybooks, and every object she considered necessary to begin again. It was far too heavy to carry. The operator followed her outside. I can have that sent to the hotel in town, he said. Mrs. Pike keeps rooms. Red Willow proper is 2 miles west. I would be grateful. You can wait here a while longer. Eliza looked at the road, bright as bone beneath the late afternoon sun. No, she said. I have waited enough for 1 day. She took her valise and started walking. The land was wider than she had imagined, not empty. That was the wrong word. The grass moved with insects and wind. Larks rose from the ditches. Mountains stood far to the west, blue and patient, as though distance itself had taken shape. But there was no wall, no tree line, no neighboring roof, close enough to reassure a woman from Pennsylvania that the world still had edges. Her city shoes lasted 1 mile before the left heel began to loosen. At 1.5 miles she found the freight wagon. 1 horse stood in the ditch, reins dragging, trembling hard enough to make the harness ring. The wagon had tipped where the road narrowed over a dry wash. 1 rear wheel hung broken. Crates had split open across the slope, spilling horseshoes, lamp chimneys, and sacks of coffee into the dust. The man lay beneath the axle. Eliza heard him before she saw his face, a rough breath. Then another. She dropped the valise. "Sir?" No answer. She scrambled down the bank, caught her skirt on thornbrush, tore it free, and knelt beside him. He was broad-shouldered, sun-browned, perhaps a few years older than she was. Blood had soaked the left side of his shirt from a cut near the ribs. The axle trapped his right leg above the knee. His eyes were closed. Eliza pressed 2 fingers beneath his jaw, pulse fast but there. "All right," she whispered. "You are not dead, which is inconvenient for both of us, but preferable." The wagon was too heavy to lift. The wash offered almost nothing useful. Dry grass, loose stone, a broken crate board. 30 feet uphill, a fence post leaned out of the ground where spring runoff had eaten the soil from one side. Eliza climbed, braced both hands around the post, and pulled. It did not move. She pulled again. The post shifted half an inch. She set one foot against the bank and used every unladylike word she had learned from 12-year-old boys. The post came free. She dragged it down, shoved the narrow end under the axle, and built a fulcrum from 2 flat stones. The first push lifted nothing. The second lifted the axle just enough to make the man groan. "Good," Eliza said through clenched teeth. "I am sorry, but groaning is proof." She pushed harder. The axle rose. With one hand she held the post down. With the other she seized the back of his belt and pulled. He moved 2 inches. The post slipped. The axle crashed into the dirt. Eliza sat back, shaking. The man's eyes opened. Gray, clear despite the pain. He looked at her, then at the wagon, then at the post in her hands. "Leave it," he said. His voice was barely sound. "No. Horse can carry word." The horse appears to have lost faith in the entire enterprise. "Mom, I have already ruined my skirt. We are committed." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Pain or amusement, she could not tell. "On 3, she said. "When I lift, you pull with your arms. My leg will remain attached if we are fortunate. 1, 2. She shoved down before saying 3. The axle lifted. He dragged himself sideways with a broken, strangled breath. Eliza caught his coat and pulled until he rolled clear. The post snapped. The axle fell. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Eliza crawled to him. His leg was badly bruised but straight. The cut at his side was deep without being mortal. She pressed folded cloth against it, opened her valise, and removed the sewing roll her mother had given her. The man watched through half-closed eyes. "That for dresses?" he asked. "Usually. You done this before?" "On children, mostly. They climb things, then they fall from them. That is not comforting. It was not intended to be." She cleaned the wound with water and the last of a small bottle of brandy. He swore once, softly and with precision. "Save your strength," she said. "I have plenty. You are underestimating how much blood is on your shirt." She stitched 6 times. His jaw tightened at every pass, but he did not move. When she tied the final knot, his face had gone pale beneath the dust. Eliza reached into her valise and found the gingerbread. Her neighbor, Mrs. Voss, had pressed 3 squares into her hand at the Philadelphia station. The first she ate in Omaha, the second somewhere after Cheyenne. The last had become less food than proof that a person from home had expected her to arrive. She looked at it, then at the man. "You need sugar. So do you." "I am not bleeding. You look hungry." "I look irritated." "You look both." She unwrapped the gingerbread and held it toward him. He did not take it. "Eat," she said. "No." "Sir, I have just sewn your side with thread meant for shirt buttons. Do not make me become unreasonable." His gaze held hers for a moment. Then he took the gingerbread, broke it exactly in half, and handed one piece back. "You first. That is foolish. Probably. You need more. I need to know you ate." The tone was quiet but immovable. Eliza accepted the half. They ate in the shade of the overturned wagon while the horse slowly stopped trembling. When the man finished, he rested his head against a crate and closed his eyes. "What is your name?" Eliza asked. There was a pause, small enough that another person might have missed it. Eliza did not. "Caleb Finch," he said. She brushed crumbs from her glove. "Eliza Marlowe." His eyes opened again. For one instant the pain left his face. Something else took its place. Recognition. Then it was gone. "Where are you headed, Miss Marlowe?" "Red Willow." "From the depot?" "Yes." "Expected somebody?" She looked at him. "That is a remarkably personal question from a man whose life I have just saved." "Fair." She waited. He looked toward the horse. "I know a boarding house in town," he said. "Pike House. Clean rooms. Better stew than it looks. That is where my trunk is being sent. I can ride. You can take the saddle. You cannot walk. I have done worse. With 1 functioning leg, 2 one just disagrees." Eliza looked at the distance to the road, the sinking sun and the horse. "I do not ride." That got his full attention. "You came to Wyoming and don't ride?" "I was not informed it was a border requirement." A real hint of a smile appeared. "We can both sit the saddle," he said, slowly. "You steer, that was my intention. Then we understand each other." He managed to stand with her shoulder beneath his arm. The horse, a chestnut mare with one white stocking, watched them approach and sighed like an overworked nurse. "What is her name?" Eliza asked. "Mercy. Does she possess any?" "More than I do." Eliza would remember that answer later. At the time, she only thought it was an odd thing for a stranger to say. They entered Red Willow after dark. Mercy carried them at a careful walk, Caleb behind Eliza, one arm braced around her waist, the other holding the reins. His breath changed whenever the mare stepped over a rut, but he never complained. The town arrived by sound before shape. A hammer striking metal, a piano missing 2 notes, men laughing behind saloon doors. Then lamplight appeared in windows and buildings gathered around the road. A church, a mercantile, a livery, a hotel with green shutters, and a boarding house whose painted sign read Pike House in letters that had survived more winters than the porch beneath them. Mrs. Pike opened the door before Eliza knocked. She was a square woman with iron-gray hair, flower on one sleeve, and no patience for incomplete explanations. She looked at Eliza. She looked at Caleb. She looked at the blood inside. "He needs a doctor," Eliza said. "He needs a bed first. Dr. Shaw is delivering the vicar's baby and may be doing so until spring. His wound is closed." "By who?" "By me." Mrs. Pike's eyebrows rose. Caleb said, "She knows what she's doing. You conscious for it?" Unfortunately, Mrs. Pike stepped aside. They ate stew at the kitchen table after she bullied Caleb into a clean shirt and Eliza into dry stockings. Eliza's trunk had already arrived and stood in the hall with a chalk mark from the depot. Caleb sat opposite her, his bandaged side stiff beneath his shirt. He watched the room without appearing to. The front door, the kitchen door, the window, every person who crossed the hallway. "You do that often?" Eliza asked. "What count exits?" His spoon stopped. "I run cattle." That was not an answer. "It's the one I have." Mrs. Pike set bread between them. "Where are you from, Mr. Finch?" she asked. "North. North is a direction. It has always been enough for me." Mrs. Pike snorted and walked away. Eliza tore bread into small pieces. "Do you know Elias Rourke?" she asked. Caleb's eyes moved to her face. "Yes." "How well?" "Well enough. He was supposed to meet me." "I know, the words came too quickly." Eliza went still. "How do you know?" He looked down at his bowl. "Red Willow talks. I arrived 3 hours ago. Red Willow talks fast." She studied him. There it was again. The sentence that did not sit straight on the page. "What kind of man is he?" she asked. Caleb took his time answering. "Hard-working. That is what he wrote. Private. That is what the depot operator implied. He keeps his word when he gives it." Eliza's fingers tightened around the bread. "Then he has an unusual way of demonstrating it." Caleb looked as though he wanted to say something. He did not. She leaned back. "Is Broken Horn as large as people claim? Depends who's claiming." "The operator said the south gate is 6 miles from town and the house is 11. That's true. He owns it all?" "Most." "How many hands?" 26 full-time. "More during roundup." "How many cattle?" "About 2,200 before calving." Eliza stared at him. "You know his operation precisely." "Like I said, I know him. Yet you did not mention that Mr. Rourke is one of the largest ranchers in the county. He doesn't think of himself that way. How fortunate for him." Caleb set down his spoon. "Miss Marlowe?" "No. Please do not defend a man who could have sent a 10-word telegram." He looked at her, gray eyes steady and unreadable. "You're right," he said. The answer took some of the force from her anger because she had expected resistance. She looked away. After supper, Mrs. Pike showed Eliza to a narrow room at the back of the house. The window faced an alley, and the wall shared a chimney with the kitchen, making the room warmer than the night outside. Eliza undressed by lamplight. When she reached into her pocket, Elias Rourke's letter came out, folded around the waxed paper that had held the gingerbread. No tricks. She placed the letter on the washstand. Then she remembered the pause before Caleb Finch gave his name. Across the hall, the man who had called himself Caleb sat awake until dawn. His name was Elias Rourke. He had known Eliza the moment she introduced herself beside the broken wagon. He knew the shape of her name from 6 letters and the set of her thinking from every page between them. He had been riding to Red Willow in a freight wagon because the ranch buckboard had thrown a wheel that morning. A headgate on the east ditch had jammed, flooding the lower pasture and holding him 3 hours longer than planned. He left Broken Horn hard and late, took the grade too quickly, and paid for the decision halfway down. When he opened his eyes beneath the wagon, Eliza Marlowe was using a fence post as a lever. He should have told her immediately. He should have said, "I am Elias Rourke. I came for you. I failed to arrive and now you are saving my life." Instead, he watched. That was the ugliest truth. 3 years earlier, a woman named Lydia Mercer had come to Broken Horn with soft hands, a dead father's mortgage, and a talent for making every request sound like devotion. Elias had believed her. By the time he discovered she and her brother were copying water deeds and banknotes from his office, he had dismissed 2 loyal men at her suggestion, signed away control of a feed contract, and nearly placed the ranch's entire North Range under a note he did not understand. He recovered the ranch. He did not recover his confidence in himself. When Dora, his cook, told him he was becoming furniture in his own house, he answered the correspondence notice Eliza had placed through a church society. He promised himself he would not be foolish again. He would observe, he would verify, he would know who she was before she knew what he owned. Then she found him helpless in the dust. She had nothing to gain. She did not know his name, his acreage, or his accounts. She used her own water, tore her petticoat for bandages, and gave him the last piece of food in her bag, because it needed doing. He had wanted proof. She gave it to him before he deserved it. And still he lied. At dawn, Elias stood outside Eliza's door with his hat in his hands. He had rehearsed the truth all night. When she opened the door, her hair was pinned, her traveling dress brushed clean, and her expression told him she had slept no better than he had. "Mr. Finch, Miss Marlowe," he looked at the floorboards between them. "I came to thank you. You did that last night, not properly. I did not help you for payment, I know. Then the matter is settled." "No," he lifted his eyes. "It isn't." She waited. The words were there. "My name is Elias." They rose, then fear, old, practiced, humiliating, closed over them. "I owe you," he said instead. Her face changed, almost imperceptibly. "Do you?" "Yes." "Then answer one question honestly." His grip tightened on the hat. "All right. Will Elias Rourke come for me today?" The hall went silent. Elias could hear Mrs. Pike moving pans in the kitchen. He could hear a wagon pass outside. He could hear the exact moment in which the truth might still cost less. "I believe he will," he said. Eliza held his gaze. Then she nodded once. "Safe travels, Mr. Finch." He walked away feeling like a man who had stepped over a warning sign he had written himself. At 9, Eliza paid a stable boy named Jamie Cole to carry a note to Broken Horn Ranch. At 11, Jamie returned. The boy removed his cap in Mrs. Pike's parlor. "Mom, Foreman Bain says Mr. Rourke was hurt on the East Grade yesterday. Says he's resting and can't receive anyone." Eliza looked at the boy. "What kind of injury?" Wagon turned. "Was he alone?" Jamie shifted. "I don't know, Mom." "Did Mr. Baines describe him?" "No, Mom." Eliza's mind became very quiet, not calm, ordered. She thought of gray eyes opening beneath the wagon. She thought of a man who knew the exact number of cattle at Broken Horn. She thought of the pause before Caleb Finch. She thought of the answer that had not been an answer. "Is Dr. Shaw at the ranch?" she asked. "No, Doctor got back from the vicar's place an hour ago." Eliza stood. "Where is his office?" Dr. Shaw was 60, exhausted and unwilling to ride 11 miles for a rumor. Eliza persuaded him with 6 stitches. "You closed a rib wound in a ditch?" he asked. "Yes." "With what?" "Silk thread." "Boiled?" "With brandy." He stared at her. "That is not the same thing." "I was aware of the limitations. You say the man's leg wasn't broken?" "Not visibly. He could bear weight with support. And you think he was Rourke?" "I think men with false names should have their wounds inspected by someone who knows their true ones." Dr. Shaw looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for his coat. They arrived at Broken Horn shortly after noon. The ranch house stood at the center of a working world, barns, corrals, bunkhouses, a smithy, windmill, cookhouse, and beyond them miles of grass cut by the silver line of an irrigation ditch. Men moved everywhere, saddles, ropes, dust, orders. The place did not feel like a gentleman's estate. It felt like an organism with 26 sets of hands keeping it alive. A rider crossed the yard and shouted toward the barn, "Mr. Rourke, doctor's here." The man who stepped out of the barn wore a clean white shirt over Eliza's bandage. He stopped when he saw her. Everything around them kept moving. A gate slammed. A horse tossed its head. A blacksmith's hammer struck iron twice, then ceased as the smith looked up. Eliza stood beside Dr. Shaw with the sun in her eyes and Elias Rourke's letter in her pocket. The man removed his hat. "Miss Marlowe." She heard the name differently in his real voice. Dr. Shaw glanced between them. "You know each other?" Eliza answered without looking away. "Not nearly as well as Mr. Rourke knows me." Dr. Shaw examined the wound in Elias's office while Eliza waited in the hall. She could have left. She did not. Leaving would have been easier, but Eliza had crossed too much country to let a dishonest man control the final shape of the conversation. When the doctor came out, he said the stitches were rough but sound, the leg deeply bruised but not broken, and the patient stupid. On the last point, Eliza said, "We agree." Dr. Shaw looked at Elias, then at Eliza, and made the wise decision to become urgently needed elsewhere. Elias closed the office door. The room was spare: desk, ledgers, a rifle over the mantel, 3 survey maps, and a framed photograph of a much younger Elias beside an older man with the same eyes. Eliza remained standing. "Say it," she said. "My name is Elias Rourke. I know, I was coming to meet you. You failed. Yes, you recognized me yesterday. Yes. And you chose a false name. Yes." Every answer was clean now. That made the earlier lie worse. "Why?" He looked at the desk. "Because I was afraid." Eliza waited. He told her about Lydia Mercer. Not every detail. Not yet. Enough. A false engagement. Copied records. A banknote nearly signed. Men dismissed. A ranch almost weakened from the inside. When he finished, Eliza said, "So you intended to inspect me?" His jaw tightened. "Yes. To see whether I was honest before you had to be." The sentence landed. He did not defend himself. "Yes. You asked me to travel 1,700 miles on the promise of no tricks. I know. You let me wait at a depot. I was under a wagon. You let me spend the night believing the man who wrote those letters had abandoned me. I know. You stood outside my door this morning and lied again." His voice dropped. "Yes." Eliza took the letter from her pocket. She opened it on the desk between them and pressed one finger to the final line. "No promises beyond that. No tricks." He looked at his own handwriting. "I broke the only promise I made." Yes, the word was not loud. It did not need to be. Elias sat heavily in the chair behind the desk. Eliza had expected anger from him, excuses, the injured pride of a powerful man corrected by a woman with no power in his world. Instead, he looked ashamed. It softened nothing, but it mattered. "I will pay your fare back east," he said, "or to any place you choose. I will pay Mrs. Pike for as long as you need. No condition." Eliza folded the letter. "You are still trying to solve me with money." His head came up. "I am trying to make restitution." "Then begin by understanding that I am not cargo damaged in transit." He went still. "I came here to meet a man, not to be evaluated by one from behind a borrowed name. What I do next belongs to me." "You're right." "I know." She turned for the door. "Miss Marlowe." She stopped but did not look back. "I am sorry." She closed her eyes once, then opened them. "I believe you," she said. "That is not the same as forgiving you." She returned to Red Willow. For the next 10 days, Elias did not come to town. Eliza appreciated the distance. She needed work before she needed answers. Red Willow's schoolmaster, Mr. Bell, had 41 children, 1 classroom, 3 cracked windows, and the haunted expression of a man losing a war by inches. Eliza offered to assist for a week. By noon on the first day, she had divided the room into reading groups, repaired the attendance register, identified 6 children who could memorize entire passages without recognizing individual words, and discovered that the stovepipe leaked smoke whenever the wind turned north. Mr. Bell watched her write a new lesson schedule on the blackboard. "Would you consider staying? For how long? Until civilization arrives? I require a more specific term." "Through winter." Eliza looked at the children. A boy named Samuel Tate held his slate so close to his face that his nose nearly touched it. A girl named Nell had hidden a dime novel inside her arithmetic book and was reading 3 grade levels above the rest of the class. 2 brothers from the Eastern Sheep Camp had never held pencils. "I will stay through October," Eliza said. "Then we will review." Teaching steadied her. Each morning gave her a problem that could be named. A child either knew a sound or did not. A slate was clean or cracked, a lesson worked or failed. No one pretended a lie became less of a lie because the liar had been hurt before. Elias came to town on the 11th day. He waited outside the schoolhouse until the last child left. Eliza saw him through the window and finished correcting Samuel's letter formation before she opened the door. His bruised leg was still stiff. He held a wooden crate. "Mr. Rourke, Miss Marlowe, what is that?" "Books, I can see that." The school ledger listed only 12 readers for 41 students. "How did you see the school ledger?" Mr. Bell asked the ranch office for coal last winter. The request included an inventory. Eliza folded her arms. "You remembered the number?" "Yes." He set the crate on the step. "I had 20 readers in storage at the ranch. They belonged to my father. And you brought them because children need them." She looked at the crate, then at him. Not because you expect gratitude, no. Not because you think 20 books purchase forgiveness, no. Not because this is a performance. His expression tightened, no. Eliza opened the crate. The books were worn but sound. McGuffey readers, a geography, 2 arithmetic texts, a primer with half the alphabet rubbed pale. She ran a thumb over one cover. These will help, I hope so. He turned to leave. Mr. Rourke. He stopped. Thank you for the books. He nodded and walked away. That was how it began, not forgiveness. Evidence. He repaired the stovepipe because smoke was a problem, then left before she could thank him. He sent a carpenter to replace the cracked window, but the invoice was made out to Broken Horn, not to her. When Samuel Tate's mother missed 2 parent meetings, Elias mentioned that the Tate family worked the ranch's west line and that Samuel's father had been injured the previous spring. Eliza rode to their cabin with Mrs. Pike, learned Samuel was doing chores until midnight, and arranged for his older cousins to split the work twice a week. Elias did not tell anyone he had suggested the visit. Eliza noticed anyway. One Saturday, he came to the schoolhouse with a second saddle. I am told, he said, that you are learning to ride. I have survived 3 lessons on Mrs. Pike's mule. Augustus is dependable. Augustus is older than the church. He has experience. Elias glanced toward Mercy, tied at the rail. Would you like to see the east ditch? The one that made you late? Yes. That is not an excellent recommendation. No. She should have refused. Instead, she put on her hat. The east ditch ran from Red Willow Creek through 11 miles of ranch land, carrying spring water toward pastures that would otherwise brown by June. Elias showed her the headgates, simple timber frames with iron lift bars, each one controlling how much water entered a lateral channel. A gate protects the field from flood, he said, but leave it closed too long and the same field dies dry. Eliza looked at him. That sounds suspiciously like a lesson. It's irrigation. It can be 2 things. They rode on. At the upper meadow, they stopped above Broken Horn Ranch. From the ridge, the operation looked smaller than it felt from the yard. Cattle moved like dark stitches across the grass. The house stood beside a line of cottonwoods planted by Elias's father. Beyond it, the ditch flashed in the sun. My father built the first 4 miles with 6 men and 2 horse-drawn slip scrapers, Elias said. They moved earth all summer. How old were you? 12. Did you help? I carried water and believed I was indispensable. Were you to myself? Eliza smiled before she meant to. Elias saw it. He did not smile back. He seemed afraid that acknowledging it might send it away. After a while, he said, I have wanted to explain more. You have explained enough. No. I gave you the shape of it, not the truth. She waited. Lydia did not merely deceive me, he said. She made me doubt everyone who warned me. Roy Baines, Dora, my father's attorney. I thought their concern was jealousy or control. She taught me to reinterpret loyalty as interference. And after she left, I decided needing anyone was the original mistake. Eliza looked down at the ditch. Water pressed against a closed gate, silver and restless. My father left when I was 10, she said. Elias turned. He went to Baltimore for work. He sent 2 letters. Then nothing. My mother took in sewing until her eyes failed, and I taught younger children before I was old enough to be trusted with a classroom. I'm sorry. I do not tell you for sympathy. I know. I tell you because I understand the appeal of a closed gate. The wind moved across the ridge. Eliza watched the water. It can protect a field, she said, for a time. Elias's gaze stayed on her face. But leave it closed too long, he said quietly, and nothing grows. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. When they returned to town, Eliza called him Elias for the first time. She did not plan it. Elias, the left stirrup is slipping. He reached to tighten it. His hands were steady. His face was not. They began again from there. By September, Eliza spent 4 mornings a week at the Red Willow School and 1 afternoon at Broken Horn, teaching the children of ranch hands who lived too far north to ride into town. The class met in the dining room. Dora Vale, the ranch cook, moved furniture with military authority and informed Elias that a house built for 12 could surrender 1 room to 8 children without collapsing. Dora was 50, black, born free in Ohio, and had followed her husband west before fever took him outside Laramie. She had managed Broken Horn's kitchen for 9 years and Elias for nearly as long. You are the letter woman, she said the first day. Eliza Marlowe. I know your name. Dora looked toward Elias, who was carrying a bench through the doorway. He has been unbearable since July. Elias stopped. I am in the room. That has never prevented truth before. Eliza pressed her lips together. Dora saw. Good, she said. You can laugh. He needs that. I do not require management, Elias said. Dora pointed at the bench, against the wall. He put it against the wall. The children came from bunkhouse families, line cabins, and the sheep camp along the eastern ridge. The youngest was 6. The oldest, 14, had never attended school for more than 3 months in succession. Eliza began with names. If a child could write a name, the world had one less chance to pretend that child did not exist. A boy named Tomas Alvarez formed each letter with his whole body, tongue pressed against his lip. When he finished, he stared at the slate. "That says me," he asked. "That says you." He touched the chalk marks. Elias stood in the hallway, unseen by the children. Eliza noticed him. She noticed the way his face changed. After class, he said, "How much would it cost to make this permanent? Do not buy a school because one lesson moved you. I'm not. You are thinking about it. Yes. Then think first about a teacher's wage, winter fuel, books, distance, and whether families can spare children during calving." "I can do that, I know." He looked surprised. Eliza gathered slates. "That is not the same as saying you should do it alone." He took the stack from her. "You have a particular way of making help sound like criticism. You have a particular way of hearing criticism whenever help arrives." Fair. The word had become his most useful one. It was also the reason she had not left. A week later, Roy Baines found Eliza outside the mercantile. He was Elias's foreman, a lean man in his 50s with a stiff left shoulder and an economy of words so severe that whole conversations passed him without purchase. "Miss Marlowe, Mr. Baines, Roy, Eliza." He looked satisfied that the transaction was complete. "Strangers asking about you." She stopped. "What strangers?" "Man named Jonas Mercer. Lydia's brother." The street noise seemed to recede. "What does he want?" "Asked when you arrived. Whether you're engaged to Elias, whether you live at the ranch, whether you've handled ranch books." "I have not." "I know. Does Elias?" "Not yet. Why tell me first?" Roy looked toward the saloon. "Because Mercer asked about you, not him." Eliza set down her parcel. "Where is Jonas now?" "Hotel." "Has Lydia returned?" "Likely. Haven't seen her." "What did they nearly take 3 years ago?" Roy's expression changed. "Elias told you." "Enough to know he did not tell me everything." Roy was silent. Then he said, "Water." Eliza looked north where the cottonwoods of Broken Horn were not visible, but the ditch that fed them ran behind every success the ranch possessed. Roy continued, "Broken Horn owns the land. Water use is recorded under an 1879 territorial appropriation. 11-mile ditch, 3 headgates, rights tied to beneficial use." "What did Lydia copy?" "Original survey notes, county filings, maybe the bank's lien releases." "Why?" "A ranch without water is cheap land." The answer was simple enough to chill her. "What is Jonas doing now?" "Filed a petition in Cheyenne claiming the upper 2 miles of ditch cross an easement held by Mercer family interests. If a judge believes it, they can ask for an injunction." "Injunction against what?" "Opening the headgate." Eliza pictured the water pressing behind timber. "How long?" 30 days would be enough. We moved the south herd in October. 2,000 head need that lower pasture before winter." "Does Elias know about the filing?" "Not yet. Notice arrives tomorrow." Eliza looked at Roy. "You said strangers. More than Jonas?" "Surveyor came through last week. Asked for old maps." "Who answered?" "Town clerk." "Can I see the copies?" Roy's gaze sharpened. "You think like a lawyer. I think like a teacher. Children make errors in patterns. Adults do too. Adults simply use better paper." They went to the county office. "The clerk, Mr." Hale objected until Eliza reminded him that the filing concerned a public territorial record. He objected again until Roy placed a Broken Horn account voucher on the counter and asked whether Mr. Hale preferred explaining the refusal to Elias. The copies arrived. An 1878 easement transfer, an 1879 ditch survey, a new affidavit signed by Jonas Mercer. Eliza read them once for content, then again for form. The 1878 transfer carried a round notary stamp. Red Willow County, Wyoming Territory. Eliza touched the words. "When was Red Willow County created?" Mr. Hale blinked. 81. "What was this district called in 1878? "Albany jurisdiction, mostly." She held up the paper. "Then how did a county that did not exist stamp a document 3 years before it was created?" Roy leaned closer. Mr. Hale turned pale. "That is a copy," he said. "Of a forgery," Eliza answered. The clerk swallowed. Jonas Mercer appeared in the doorway. He was elegantly dressed for a town that punished elegance with dust, dark coat, silver watch chain, polished boots. His smile arrived before warmth did. "Miss Marlowe," he said. Eliza did not ask how he knew her. "Mr. Mercer." Roy shifted beside her. Jonas glanced at the document. "I see you have taken an interest in matters beyond the classroom. I dislike incorrect dates, do you?" "Deeply." He stepped inside. "My sister would like to speak with you." "Your sister can write. She believes you have been misled. That concern appears common in your family." The smile held, but only at the edges. Jonas looked at Roy. "Could we have privacy?" "No," Eliza said. "I asked Mr. Baines, and I answered." For the first time, Jonas's expression showed what lived beneath the polish: annoyance. Then it was gone. "My sister cared for Elias," he said. "He used her trust and ruined her name when she became inconvenient. Is that why you filed a document bearing a county stamp from the future?" Mr. Hale made a small sound. Jonas's eyes settled on Eliza. "You should be careful attaching yourself to a man with his history. I am attached to the truth of a date. You are a schoolmistress from the East. This is a territorial water case. You may not understand the stakes." Eliza placed the document flat on the counter. "I understand that 1878 came before 1881. Roy coughed into his hand. Jonas stepped closer. "You think he will protect you when this turns?" Eliza met his gaze. "I do not require Elias Rourke to protect me from arithmetic." The smile vanished. "Tell Lydia," Eliza said, "that if she wants to speak with me, she may do so in daylight." Jonas left. Only when the door closed did Eliza notice her hands were cold. Roy looked at the forged stamp. "We need Elias." "Yes." They found him at the East Headgate. The notice had arrived before they did. Elias stood beside the ditch with the territorial order open in his hand. Water moved beneath the gate in a narrow, controlled sheet. Behind him, 4 ranch hands waited for instruction. The injunction hearing was set in 12 days. Until then, Broken Horn could not alter the flow at the upper gate. The ranch's present setting was allowed. No increase. No emergency diversion. No work on the disputed 2-mile section. "What does that mean?" Eliza asked. Elias folded the notice. "It means the lower pasture gets half the water it needs. And the herd, we move early or we lose weight before winter." "How much?" "Could be 80 to 100 pounds a head if the grass fails." Eliza calculated 2,000 cattle. Even at a modest sale price, the loss would be severe. Elias looked at Roy. "You showed her the filing. She found the stamp." Roy handed him the copy. Elias read it, then read it again. His face hardened. Red Willow County did not exist. "No," Eliza said. He looked at her. "How did I miss this? You were reading the claim." "I was reading the paper." He turned toward the water. For one moment, Eliza saw the old response gather in him. The instinct to close every gate, send everyone away, carry the danger alone. "I need the original survey book," he said. "I have already asked Mr. Hale to seal the county copy." Elias looked back. "Good. Roy is wiring a land agent in Cheyenne." "Good. I want to see the ranch ledger from 1879 through 1882. Waterwork, wages, timber purchases, anything showing continuous use." "That is in my office, then we should go." Elias held her gaze. "You are not obligated to enter this, I know. Jonas Mercer came near you." "Yes, I want you at Mrs. Pike's until this is resolved." "No." His jaw tightened. "Eliza, no, I am not ordering you." "It sounds remarkably similar. I am trying to keep you out of their reach, and I am telling you that secrecy is where they work best." He looked at the closed gate. She lowered her voice. "You said a gate protects a field from flood." He did not move. "But this is the part you keep forgetting," she said. "A closed gate can kill what it was meant to save." The men behind him had become very interested in saddles, boots, and the horizon. Elias looked at Roy. "Get every ledger from 79 onward." Then he looked at Eliza. "Come to the office." They worked until midnight. The ledgers proved regular ditch maintenance, wages paid to 6 men in 1879, timber purchased for Headgates in 1880, and a repair crew after spring washout in 1882. But the strongest record came from an unexpected place. Dora brought coffee at 10 and listened while Eliza read an entry aloud. "April 14, 1880. Paid $12 to H. Vale for meals, ditch camp." Dora stopped. "Hannah Vale, do you know her?" Eliza asked. "My sister-in-law. Kept a cook tent when they dug the upper lateral. Is she alive?" "Alive and loud in Fort Collins." "Would she remember the work?" Dora set down the coffee pot. "Hannah remembers every debt since Appomattox." Elias sat forward. "A witness to beneficial use in 1880. "More than a witness," Dora said. "She kept receipts because your father once argued over 2 pounds of sugar." Eliza looked at Elias. He almost smiled. "Wire her," he said. Dora did. At 1 in the morning, Eliza closed the final ledger. Elias stood by the window. The ranch yard was dark except for one lantern at the barn. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." "I won't, neither will I." He turned. "I was wrong to ask you to hide." "Yes." I knew that before the words finished leaving my mouth. "That is progress." He came closer, stopping on the other side of the desk. Jonas spoke to you, yes. What did he say? That Lydia believes you used her. That I do not understand the stakes. That you may not protect me. Elias's face went still. What did you say? That I did not require your protection from arithmetic. A breath left him that might have become laughter in another life. Then his expression changed. Eliza, I need to tell you something plainly. She waited. When I heard Mercer had asked about you, I was afraid in a way I was not afraid for the ranch. The room seemed to narrow. I have spent 3 years thinking fear was proof I should close the gate, he said. Now I think it may only be proof that something matters. Eliza looked at him. Do not make me the lesson you learned from Lydia. I'm not. Do not love me because I am the opposite of her. I don't. You cannot know that yet. He absorbed the words without flinching. You're right, he said. Then let me say only what I know. His voice was quiet. You matter to me. The line was not polished. That was why she believed it. Eliza looked down at the ledger. You matter to me, too. Elias did not move. She lifted her eyes. That is not an answer to every question, I know. It is not forgiveness for the beginning, I know. It does not mean I have decided where I belong, I know. A pause. But it is true, she said. Elias nodded once. For that night, truth was enough. Lydia Mercer arrived in Red Willow 2 days before the hearing. She entered the schoolhouse at the end of the afternoon lesson wearing dove-gray wool, pearl earrings, and the composed sorrow of a woman who had practiced being wronged in mirrors. The children were gone. Eliza was cleaning chalk from the board. Miss Marlowe? Eliza turned. Miss Mercer. Lydia's beauty was real. So was the intelligence behind it. Eliza understood at once why dismissing her would be dangerous. I had hoped we could speak privately. We are private. Lydia glanced at the open door. Not entirely. The door stays open. A small recalculation passed over Lydia's face. I suppose Elias has told you his version. He told me enough to recognize the difference between fear and evidence. Then he did not tell you everything. People rarely do. Lydia stepped closer. He asked me to marry him, did he? He gave me access to his home, his accounts, his plans. Then when I challenged the way he treated me, he called me dishonest and forced me out. What did you challenge? His control. By copying water deeds, Lydia's mouth tightened. Those documents affected my family. The forged transfer uses a county stamp that did not exist in 1878. For the first time, the performance broke. Only a little. Lydia recovered. You have no idea what you are involved in. I am beginning to. You came here because no one wanted you back east. The words were chosen carefully. Eliza felt them find the old bruise, the closed school, the rejected applications, the trustee's letter. Lydia saw that they landed. She continued. Elias sent for a useful woman, someone plain enough to be grateful, someone with nowhere better to go. Eliza set down the chalk cloth. For one breath she wanted to answer from hurt, then she answered from truth. I came here because I chose movement over waiting. Lydia said nothing. I stayed in Red Willow after I learned Elias lied, Eliza continued. I took work he did not give me. I built relationships he did not purchase. I found your false date because I know how to read a page, not because a rancher placed me beside him. You think this town will choose you over me? This town does not need to choose. Eliza stepped toward the open door. The hearing will decide the water claim. The federal records will decide the document. Your conduct will decide the rest. Lydia's composure thinned. He will close you out eventually. Perhaps. The answer surprised both of them. Eliza held Lydia's gaze. That is the risk of caring for another person. They may fail you. But I will not avoid that risk by helping you harm him. Lydia's face became cold. You are making a mistake. I have made several. This is not one. Lydia left. Eliza stood alone in the schoolhouse until the shaking in her hands passed. At dusk, Elias found her sitting on the front step. Roy had told him Lydia was in town. He sat beside Eliza without asking. What did she say? Eliza told him. All of it. When she repeated Lydia's line about being plain enough to be grateful, Elias's hand closed into a fist on his knee. Do not, Eliza said. I didn't say anything. You were about to. Yes. Then say something useful. He looked at her. You were never chosen because you had nowhere else to go. I know that now. I wrote because your first letter disagreed with me 3 times. Despite herself, Eliza smiled. You kept count? I kept the letter. What else? You said a house is not a home merely because one man owns every room in it. That was impertinent. It was accurate. He looked toward the empty street. I wanted someone who would tell me the truth even when I disliked it, and then punished me for arriving as advertised. Yes, she studied his profile. Why did you ask Lydia to marry you? The question had waited between them. Elias took his time, because she made admiration feel like understanding. Eliza said nothing. I had built Broken Horn into something larger than my father left me. People treated that as proof of certainty. Lydia praised every decision. I mistook agreement for trust. And now? Now I think trust is someone who can tell you that you are wrong and stay long enough to help you repair it. Eliza looked down at her hands. My father did not stay. I know. My mother never trusted anyone after he left. I know. I have spent 17 years calling that strength. Elias's voice was gentle. Some of it was, she looked at him, and some of it was fear, she said. Yes, the word did not accuse, it accompanied. Eliza let her shoulder rest against his, only for a moment, then longer. The hearing took place in the Territorial Hall, a room above the Mercantile with 40 chairs and windows that rattled in the wind. Jonas Mercer sat beside a Cheyenne attorney. Lydia sat behind them in gray. Elias sat with Mr. Pruitt, his lawyer Roy, Dora, and Eliza. The territorial examiner was not a judge but a land commissioner named Walter Crane, known for impatience and an allergy to speeches. He reviewed the petition. Jonas's attorney argued that the disputed easement predated Broken Horn's ditch, that Mercer family rights had never been extinguished, and that continued water diversion caused irreparable harm. Mr. Pruitt answered with use records. 11 miles of maintained ditch, 26 years of ranch occupation, continuous beneficial use since 1879, 2,000 head dependent on the lower pasture, 6 wage entries from the first construction season. Then Hannah Vale entered the room. She was 63, carried a carpetbag full of receipts, and looked at Dora as though they had paused an argument yesterday rather than 12 years earlier. Hannah testified that she fed the ditch crew in 1880. She produced 3 receipts signed by Elias's father. One listed timber delivered to the upper Headgate. Another listed a repair to the disputed section. The third recorded the county designation used at the time, Albany District, not Red Willow County. Commissioner Crane examined the forged transfer. When was this county organized? He asked. 1881, Mr. Hale said, and this document claims 1878. Yes, sir. Jonas's attorney objected that the stamp could have been added during later certification. Eliza leaned toward Pruitt. The paper, she whispered. Pruitt turned. What? The paper stock? Compare the margin watermark to the 1882 repair claim. Pruitt looked. The sheets were identical. He requested both documents be held to the window. A faint mill mark appeared along the lower edge. W.C. and Sons, Denver, 1882. The 1878 transfer had been written on paper manufactured 4 years later. The room went silent. Commissioner Crane looked at Jonas Mercer. Counsel? Jonas's attorney had no useful answer. The injunction was dissolved that afternoon. The water claim was referred for fraud investigation, but the victory did not come cleanly. As Elias and the others left the hall, Roy ran up the stairs. The upper gate's been cut. Elias turned. What? Cable severed. Gate dropped crooked. Water backing into the north bank. If the bank failed, the flood would tear through the ditch and leave the lower pasture dry for weeks. The hearing had been a distraction. The darkest point arrived after they had won. They rode hard to Broken Horn. The upper ditch had swollen into a brown, violent channel. Water struck the jammed gate, climbed the bank, and spilled through the grass in widening sheets. Men worked with ropes. The iron lift cable hung severed. Elias dismounted before Mercy stopped. "Get the south spill open," he shouted. "Roy, take 6 men to the bank. Sandbags from the feed shed. Nobody enters the channel." Eliza looked at the gate. A timber beam had twisted beneath the pressure. The lift frame could not rise because the gate was wedged against its own guide. "How long?" she asked. "Bank could go in 20 minutes. What happens if it does? We lose the ditch, 26 years of earthwork, the lower pasture, the fall herd, the ranch's winter credit. All of it could wash out through one broken gate." Elias tied a rope around his waist. Eliza seized his arm. "You said nobody enters the channel. I'm not entering. I'm crossing the brace. The brace is underwater. I know where it is." His injured leg was not fully healed. She saw the decision on his face, the old one. Carry it alone. Ilias. No time. There is another way. He looked at her. The headgate frame stood on 2 vertical posts. The broken cable had wrapped beneath the crossbeam before snapping. If they could pull the loose end from the far bank, the tension might turn the gate enough to free the wedge. But the rope angle was wrong. "We need height," Eliza said. "The bank won't hold a wagon. Not a wagon." She pointed to the cottonwood growing 10 yards downstream. "Run a block over that limb. Roy followed her line of sight. Redirect the pull. Use 2 teams on dry ground, Eliza said. 1 to rotate the gate, 1 to hold it from slamming open. Elias understood. Block and tackle from the smithy. Men ran, the water climbed. Eliza helped loop wet rope through the iron ring. Dora arrived with ranch hands carrying sandbags. Roy directed the bank crew. Elias stood in the center of it, not alone now, but connected to every person moving. The first team pulled. The gate did not move. The cottonwood limb bent. "Again!" Elias shouted. Leather snapped tight. The gate shuddered. Mud burst from the guide. "Hold!" The second team took the weight. Elias signaled. Now, the horses leaned. The broken gate rotated 6 inches. Water punched through the opening with a roar. The bank dropped half a foot. For 1 terrible second, Eliza thought it had failed. Then the pressure lowered. The waterline fell from the crest. Men shouted, not victory, instruction, relief with work still inside it. They held the gate crooked but open until nightfall, then built a temporary brace by lantern light. At midnight the ditch ran within its banks. The pasture would live. Elias found Eliza sitting on an overturned trough, soaked to the knees and streaked with mud. He sat beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Finally he said, "You saw the pull angle. I saw a problem. You changed the whole plan in 10 seconds. I have spent my life arranging 40 children so one doorway does not become a disaster." He laughed. It came out exhausted and real. Eliza looked at him. She had heard him almost laugh before. This was different. Open young. A sound from behind the gate. There you are, she thought. Elias wiped mud from his face. When the water rose, my first thought was to cross the brace alone. I know. My second thought was that you would stop me. I would have. My third was to listen. That one may save you eventually. He turned toward her. Eliza, yes, I love you. The words came without rehearsal. No borrowed name, no conditions. She felt fear rise, old as her father's empty chair, old as her mother's bent back over sewing. She did not deny it. I love you too, she said, and I am still afraid. So am I. That does not sound promising. It sounds honest. She looked at the water moving through the open gate. No more tests, she said. Never. No decisions about my safety made without me. Agreed. No gratitude mistaken for obedience. Agreed. No closing the gate because fear arrives first. He looked at the dark channel. I will fail at that sometimes. So will I. He reached for her hand. She gave it. Then we open it again, he said. This time she did not pull away. The fraud investigation moved quickly after the sabotage. A ranch hand from a neighboring spread admitted Jonas Mercer had paid him $40 to cut the gate cable during the hearing. Jonas fled toward Colorado. He was arrested near the line with forged survey blanks and 2 county seals in his saddlebag. Lydia left Red Willow before dawn. No one stopped her. Elias received word a month later that she had taken a train east from Cheyenne. He read the telegram at the kitchen table, folded it, and placed it beside his coffee. What do you feel? Eliza asked. He considered. Less than I expected. Relief? Some. Anger? Not much. Then what? He looked toward the window where the repaired headgate could not be seen, but the cottonwoods along the ditch showed green against the fall grass. Like water finally stopped pressing against a gate I forgot was closed. Eliza took his hand. The metaphor belonged to both of them now. By October, the Broken Horn School had 12 pupils. Elias converted the east parlor into a classroom despite Dora's insistence that the room had never served any purpose worthy of defending. Roy built shelves. Mr. Bell sent 2 surplus desks. Mrs. Pike organized a book drive and collected 37 volumes, including 6 that no child should have read and 3 that no adult would admit donating. Eliza taught mornings at Broken Horn and 3 afternoons in Red Willow. She did not move into the ranch house, not yet. She kept her room at Pike House because choosing Elias did not require dissolving the rest of herself. He understood, or he learned to. They courted in plain sight, rides along the ditch, supper at Mrs. Pike's, evenings in the ranch office with ledgers and lesson plans on the same desk. One night, Elias looked at the papers spread between them. What would it take to keep the school open all year? A teacher besides me. I thought you were the teacher. I am one teacher. Red Willow needs 2. Broken Horn needs 1 in winter. The eastern camps need someone who can travel. How much? Eliza named wages, fuel, books, and a reserve. Elias did not reach for his checkbook. He asked who should govern it. That was how she knew he was listening. They formed a school committee with Mrs. Pike, Dora, Mr. Bell, a Mexican drover named Esteban Alvarez, and Elias as one member among 5. Not owner, member. At the first meeting, Elias tried to pay the entire annual cost. Eliza refused. A school held up by one man's generosity falls when that man has a bad year. What do you propose? Ranch contributions by family, town levy, church fund, and one application to the Territorial Education Board. They will deny it. Then I will write again. Eliza smiled. He had learned what her letters could do. The Eastern offer arrived in November. It came from the reopened Harris Academy outside Philadelphia. The trustees who had lost the endowment were gone. A new board had recovered part of the money. They wanted Eliza as headmistress. Double her former salary, housing included, authority over curriculum, a staff of 4. She read the letter alone in the Broken Horn classroom while snow began against the windows. For 2 hours she told no one. Then she rode to the north pasture where Elias was inspecting winter feed. He saw the envelope in her hand. His face changed. She gave it to him. He read every line. When he finished, he looked across the snow. That is a good position. Yes, you earned it. Yes. When do they need an answer? 3 weeks. He folded the letter with care. I will not ask you to stay. Anger rose in her so quickly that she almost laughed. You still do not understand. He turned. I am trying not to make your choice about me. It is partly about you. I don't want you to surrender work that belongs to you. And I do not want the generous version. His expression tightened. Eliza, the plain truth. That is what your letter promised. Try again. Snow gathered on his coat shoulders. For a long moment he said nothing. Then the control left his face. I want you here. The words sounded torn out of him. I want to hear you in the schoolroom when I come in from the range. I want your papers on my desk and your arguments at my table. I want to know which child learned to read, and which Headgate needs timber, and why you have written 6 pages to a board in Cheyenne that will likely ignore you. Despite herself, Eliza's eyes filled. Elias continued, I want a life with you, not because you rescued me, not because you saved the ranch, not because you are useful. He stepped closer. I want you when there is nothing to fix. That was the sentence. The one that reached the part of her that had always believed she earned belonging through usefulness. Eliza looked down at the snow. I do not know my answer yet. I know. I need to think about the school. I know. I need to think about who I am here, separate from you. I know. She looked up. And I need you not to become noble and silent while I decide. A flicker of humor moved through his eyes. I can attempt only one of those. Choose silent less often. I will try. Eliza spent the next week comparing 2 real lives. Philadelphia offered structure, authority, books, paved streets, colleagues, and a position she once would have considered the proof that her years of work mattered. Wyoming offered 12 children in an East Parlor, 41 in a town school, winter roads, uncertain funding, 1 repaired Headgate, and a man learning that love was not control. She asked Mrs. Pike how a person knew where she belonged. Mrs. Pike kneaded bread and said, belonging is usually built after the decision, not discovered before it. She asked Dora. Dora said, choose the place where your work grows larger than you, she asked Roy. Roy stared at her as though she had asked a horse to explain scripture. Then he said, when you talk about Philadelphia, you describe a job. When you talk about here, you name people. That answer followed her for 2 days. At the schoolhouse, Tomas Alvarez read a full page aloud without stopping. Samuel Tate wrote a letter to his injured father. Nell corrected a geography text and was right. Eliza looked at them and understood. The question was not whether Philadelphia was better. The question was where her life had begun to multiply. She wrote 2 letters. The first declined the headmistress position. The second proposed that Harris Academy fund a Western teacher exchange, sending used texts and 1 trained instructor each year to territorial schools in return for reports on frontier education. She included enrollment figures: 53 children between Red Willow and Broken Horn, 17 with no regular access before September, 12 now attending through winter, 16 families willing to contribute cash, fuel, or labor. She did not ask for charity. She presented an opportunity. Then she rode to Broken Horn. Elias was in the East Parlor fitting a second blackboard to the wall. She stood in the doorway. I sent my answer. He lowered the drill. I declined. For a moment he did not breathe. Then he set the tool down very carefully. Are you certain? Yes. Because of me? In part. He waited. Because of them, she said, looking at the desks. Because this work is not smaller, it is only earlier. Elias crossed the room. I will not let you disappear into my life. Good. I would make that difficult. I know. I wrote the academy a proposal. Of course you did. They may send books, perhaps a teacher. He smiled. What? You answered a marriage question with an education plan. You have not asked a marriage question. He stopped. The room went quiet. Snow light filled the windows. Elias reached into his coat. The ring was simple, gold, worn thin on one side. "My mother's," he said. "I have carried it for 3 weeks and failed to find a moment that did not feel like an ambush." Eliza looked at him. "This one is not an ambush. You brought it upon yourself. That is not romantic. I warned you about polished manners." He took her hand. Then the humor left his face. "Eliza Marlowe, will you marry me and continue correcting me for the rest of my natural life, only when necessary?" That is not reassuring. It was not intended to be. He laughed. Then he asked again plain, "Will you marry me?" Eliza thought of the depot, the broken wagon, the false name, the open headgate, the schoolroom where no schoolroom had been. "Yes," she said, not because the letters required an ending, because the truth had finally earned one. They married in January, snow-covered red willow to the windowsills, so the ceremony took place at Broken Horn in the dining room. Dora cooked for 2 days. Mrs. Pike cried and denied it. Roy stood beside Elias with the expression of a man witnessing a long-delayed repair. Tomas carried the rings. Nell read a poem too advanced for the occasion and corrected the minister's pronunciation midway through. Elias did not look away from Eliza once. Afterward, when the house grew loud with food and boots and music, he found her near the east parlor. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, "do not become attached to the novelty." "I intend to." She touched his collar. "You are staring." "I have been instructed to recognize what matters." "By whom?" "You." The room at the East End became a proper school by spring. The Harris Academy accepted Eliza's proposal and sent 4 crates of books, $60 for fuel, and a young teacher named Margaret Snow who arrived with 1 trunk and the firm belief that frontier children required discipline. Within a month, Tomas had taught her otherwise. The ditch held. The lower pasture carried the herd through winter. Broken Horn sold cattle the following fall at healthy weight, and the loss the Mercers intended never came. Over the next 6 years, the school committee opened 2 satellite rooms, trained 3 local teachers, and enrolled more than 100 children who otherwise would have missed entire seasons of learning. That was the late proof. Not one dramatic rescue, not one hearing, a system that kept working after the crisis passed. Elias changed more slowly. He still tried to solve problems before asking who else had a stake in them. He still went quiet when fear arrived, but he learned to open the office door. He learned to say, "I need help," though the word sounded foreign in his mouth for years. Eliza changed, too. She learned that being needed was not the same as being loved. She learned to rest without first earning exhaustion. She learned that depending on someone did not make departure inevitable. Their first child, a daughter named Hannah, was born during a spring rain. Elias held the baby with both hands and looked terrified. "She is very small," he said. "That is common. What if I do something wrong?" "You will." He looked at Eliza. "So will I?" Hannah opened one eye and objected to the entire arrangement. Dora laughed from the doorway. "Good," she said. "That child has sense." Years later, Hannah would learn her letters from Tomas Alvarez, who became the first teacher trained entirely through the Broken Horn School. Samuel Tate took over the ranch accounts. Nell attended a normal school in Denver on a scholarship created by the committee she once interrupted. Roy never admitted his shoulder hurt, but he accepted a chair beside the stove without argument. Mrs. Pike continued making bread and giving advice no one requested, and every summer, when the east ditch ran high, Elias and Eliza walked to the upper headgate. The repaired frame bore a dark mark where the cable had been cut. Elias never replaced that timber. He said it reminded him what happened when fear and secrecy controlled the water. One evening, nearly 10 years after Eliza arrived, they stood there while Hannah and her younger brother chased grasshoppers along the bank. Elias touched the old mark. "Do you ever think about the wagon?" "Yes." "Do you ever wish you'd kept walking?" Eliza considered the question honestly. "If I had known who you were," he nodded. "I might have left you there longer." He laughed. Then she took his hand. "No," she said. "I would still have stopped." "Even after everything?" The stopping was never the mistake. Water moved through the open gate bright under the evening sky. Eliza had crossed the country believing a letter would decide her future. It did not. A stranger did not decide it. A ranch did not decide it. Fear did not decide it. She chose again and again what to open and what to refuse. So did Elias. He had spent years closing every gate before anyone could hurt him. She had spent years pretending she needed no gate at all. In the end, they learned the same truth. Nothing living grows behind a gate that never opens.